Right, Chair, if we could just wait for Fitzroy.
You're good to go, Chair.
Right, here we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Housing Scrutiny Commission. So my name is Gavin Edwards, and I am chair of the commission. Before we start, I have a few meeting announcements to make about the meeting. This meeting is being streamed live to Southwark Council's YouTube channel. Please note all guests have their microphones muted when they join the meeting. You'll be asked to remain on mute unless you're invited to speak. Please wait until I've given you permission to speak before unmuting the microphone. To ensure that this virtual meeting runs smoothly, only one individual should speak at a time. Any person speaking must be permitted to finish what they're saying without interruption. If I request an individual stop speaking, then they should do so immediately. If a member of the commission wishes to speak, could I ask them to indicate via the wave hand function. In actual fact, just because I haven't checked out all of the tech on the computer that I'm using, I'm perfectly happy for people to use the actual hand wave function as well. So that's not a problem either. Bearing in mind that the meeting will be streamed to the council's YouTube channel, if you're planning to speak to the meeting, you may choose to switch off your camera so that only your voice can be heard. Members of the public who are disconnected from the meeting due to technical difficulties should use the link on the dial-in instructions they were sent initially before returning to the meeting. If a member of the committee or officer loses connection, can they please inform Fitzroy Williams or Everton Roberts via email or Microsoft Teams immediately so that they can adjourn the meeting until the connection is restored. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. And finally, in the interests of health and safety, we will be taking 5 to 10 minute comfort break at the end of each hour or thereabouts. So I will move on to the meeting. Apologies, I received no apologies for absence. Are there any apologies? Everton, I don't know if you've had any other indication.
Just an apology for lateness from Hamish. He's almost at home. He'll be about 15 minutes at the most, I think.
No problem at all. Thank you, Damien. So there is a change of vice chair. Can we note that Overview and Scrutiny Committee has appointed Councillor Damien O'Brien as vice chair of the commission? There, I can see applause at that. So congratulations, Damien. And confirmation of voting members. Can voting members please indicate you are present when I call your name? So Councillor Damien O'Brien.
Present and voting member.
Councillor Rada Burgess. Not here at the moment, I think. Councillor Dora Dixon-File.
Present and voting member, Chair.
Thanks, Dora. And Councillor Paul Fleming.
Oh, present and voting. Hello.
Hi, Paul. And Councillor John Hartley.
Also present and voting.
And we've heard about apologies for lateness for Councillor Hamish McCullum. So co-opted members, it's just important to remind people at this point, the elections for the housing co-opted member positions are still to take place. And I have again invited Chris Claridge and Ina Nagoita, former co-opted members, to join us on an informal basis, as they have done for the previous meetings this year, and hopefully we can formalise that position as soon as possible. So moving on, first of all, onto our agenda this evening. Just bear with me 1 second whilst I arrange my papers online. So moving on to notification of any items which are urgent. So I haven't been notified of any urgent items. Disclosure of interests and dispensations. Do any members of the committee wish to make any declarations of interests or dispensations? Can't see anybody there. Okay, that's great. And the minutes of the meeting. So to approve as correct record, the minutes of the meetings held on the 1st of December and the 28th of January so 1st December 2020 and 28th of January 2021. Can we agree both of those as a true record of the meeting? Seeing nods, thumbs up. Okay, I will take that as agreement. Moving on to the substantive item on our agenda, which is on building safety and cladding. So we have this one substantive item today, so it will be a shorter meeting than usual, but a very, very important issue, I'm sure you will agree, and a very live issue as well, given all that is going on at the moment. So I can see we have Councillor Leo Pollock, who is with us, and I'm sure there are officers joining us as well who will also be able to chip in. As usual, Leo, I think it would be good if we could, thank you first of all for the written report, which is really, really useful, and for the supporting presentation that members of the committee have been sent. If we're going to hand over to you to give some introductory comments, and we'll go into questions from the committee. Over to you, Leo.
Okay, thank you, Gavin, and thank you to the Commission for bringing this item to us today, because it's obviously an extremely important issue that's been a big focus in our borough, and obviously it's got a lot of profile nationally as well. What I would say is that we as a council, we have obviously enormous stock. We've got over 55,000 homes across 260 council estates, over 2,500 blocks. And that is obviously a major undertaking in terms of and responsibility in terms of the wider responsibilities we have with the management of our stocks. And it goes without saying the safety of our residents and the kind of well-being linked to building safety and fire safety in particular is of paramount importance. It is the number one issue and the number one factor whenever it comes to decisions we make about how we spend our money investing in our stock. It should also be worth adding as well, this is the borough that experienced the horror of the Lacanau fire. We've seen a lot of this before. A lot of the national picture seems to be sort of a fixed distance behind the curve in terms of what our experience and our kind of advocacy points to. So it has obviously that extra focus here in Southwark. What I would just say, I'll try and just touch briefly on the contents of the reports and some of what we're doing on building safety, as well as just a couple of comments on what's happening nationally as well. Obviously, there's been quite a bit of profile today with Robert Jenrick's announcement in Parliament around a cladding fund, such that it is. So what we have done kind of following the Grenfell fire is obviously undertake fire risk assessments of all of our blocks. It's a good thing. I think that there's a lot of scrutiny on those fire risk assessments. We adapt them to the different, we adapt the requirements of those FRAs to the different circumstances of blocks that we have. And in more recent months, with the kind of the building safety bill and the fire safety bill passing through Parliament, we have started to mobilise internally to make sure that we have an appointed person who'll be taking on the responsibilities of the corporate liabilities in relation to building and fire safety for our stock, and also a plan in place to start recruiting a set of building safety managers who would have responsibility, like operational responsibility, for a set of blocks as well. Obviously, it goes without saying that in relation to cladding in particular and ACM cladding, that is not the limit of dangerous cladding that we have in Britain, but it has been the focus, almost exclusive focus of dangerous cladding nationally. But even so, obviously, you all know all the background in relation to the requirements that RICS and the insurers and subsequently lenders had in relation to having EWS1 forms, signing off any sale of a leasehold property in the borough, both in our council stock and in private sector and housing association stock as well. There are a number of options that were in front of us, given that there were so many people who were effectively caught in mortgage limbo and seeing the value of their assets potentially under threat because of this situation. Some councils have decided to just leave it all to leaseholders and have them pick up the cost of procuring a qualified engineer, of which there are very few, to undertake EWS1 inspections. We have been fortunate, partly because of the size of our stock, but because it's just been a choice that we've made to bring in a qualified engineer with the consultancy's Plan B, who have already started doing detailed inspections on a handful of blocks, that initial pilots that we've undertaken, and are also doing full inspections now on all of the high-rise blocks that we have, starting with desktop analysis and then following up with detailed inspections where necessary, which will hopefully be complete by the end of March. So we'll, at that point, hopefully have a much fuller picture of where we are. But I think the key thing to emphasise here is we're not leaving leaseholders to their own devices. There is obviously a decision to be made as well in relation to where the costs of subsequent remedial works are picked up. But to date, we are not recharging leaseholders for any remedial works from any elements that have been picked up during that process. And I would note as well that a number of other councils have already made decisions to put all of that cost onto leaseholders. I think the key thing, so that's kind of the sum of where we've got to with our own stock. We've set up a building safety board and a building safety programme that will be the basis for us both inspecting and monitoring and enforcing on private sector stock as well. You'll probably know that housing association stock, in terms of monitoring and inspection, is the responsibility of the department, MHCLG. And I think where we're, so that's essentially the sum of where we are at present, but it goes without saying that when it comes to our asset management strategy refresh, which is hopefully coming to Cabinet in June, this is the #1 priority that comes up on top of everything else. There will be a much stronger kind of risk-based analysis of which estates and blocks are sequenced for the purpose of the major work cycle in the borough, and obviously the work that's described in this report is critical to that. I would just make a couple of comments, if you allow me, Gavin, just on where we are nationally, because there's just I don't know why I was feeling hopeful last night when I heard that Genric was making an announcement, but I think it's fair to say that there is a breakdown in the kind of responsiveness and quality of listening and action across the wider government and building sector, all tiers, all types of builders, both for new build and for management of stock as well. It's incredibly frustrating when you have clear kind of cross-party select committee saying conclusion that you need 15 billion as your starting point to meet remedial works. Otherwise, you're placing a lot of homeowners into a position where there's potential bankruptcy in front of them. I saw Inside Housing had a survey showing 1 in 6 leaseholders are considering bankruptcy as their solution to dealing with the cost of remedial works in their blocks. But you know, the announcement today, 3.5 million as a cladding fund, is barely 5% of the required funding. You know, there was no controls on the insurance premiums, which are now shooting through the sky. You know, all blocks, anyone who owns a home in a block under 18 meters have kind of a cap on loans, but loans is their solution, and that results in a title charge. So they have today seen a significant reduction in the value of their assets and their lifetime's work. And you know, I think there's this, and there's also just the fact that after Grenfell, which was you know a particularly bitter experience for us in Southwark, given the coroner's inquest into Lacanau, the clear learnings that had come out of that, that you know the additional issues that we are highlighting in relation to building safety. Obviously, the main kind of focal point was at the towers at the Ledbury, which were not an ACM issue. That was another type of building safety issue. But there's been very little movement in terms of national regulation and funding to support us for the widest range of building safety issues that we have in front of us. So yeah, thank you, Gavin, for letting me have a little moan about what's happening nationally. But it's easy to sort of see the glass half empty. I do also think there's a lot of positive to take out of the fact that there is such focus on building safety now. It's long overdue. There's a lot of unsafe stock that people are living in across Britain, and we've got systems in place now to try and inspect, monitor, and follow up building safety issues that come up both in private sector and council stock going forward. I'll leave it at that. I know that we've got all the key officers here who can certainly elaborate on the issues further.
Thank you, Leo. And clearly we've got a bit less pressure on our agenda this evening than we maybe normally have, which means I'm slightly less grumpy than I normally might be about people speaking. So just before we come to questions, and I can see both Damien and Ina have indicated already, and please, to other members of the committee, please do indicate. Leo, could you just introduce the officers who are here, just so people know who's in the room, so to speak?
Yep, so we've got Desmond Vincent, who I'm just seeing the order of what I can see on my screen. Desmond Vincent, who, they've moved around now, how confusing, who oversees private sector building safety. We've got Simon Holmes, who's our head of engineering, Dave Hodgson, who's our director of asset management. I hope I've not missed anyone out. Is that? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to take them in the order that I have seen them. So I'm going to come to Damien first, and then we'll go from there. Damien.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leo, for the presentation. I've got a few questions, and I think I'm going to have time to ask them, so I won't Scooby snack them now. The first one was in regard to prioritising fire safety on our tall buildings. So obviously, if the council has any ACM clad buildings, I would have thought they would be the top priority. Has the BSB come out with sort of a hierarchy of which buildings need to be addressed first for safety concerns, and then the second and third tiers? And in parallel to that, we've obviously got leaseholders and affordable rent or shared ownership owners that want to staircase, that can't get mortgages, that need the EWS1 form, but they may not be in a building that actually has the highest risk for fire safety. So can the inspections for EWS1 forms run in parallel with fire safety, which is protecting our residents?
I'll answer the last one first. I mean, I think I can answer both, but we've got our actual experts here, so I'm going to kind of turf them out. One thing I would just add in relation to leaseholders who are in the situations that you'll describe, I should have mentioned this just in my introduction, was that we're also quite close to approving a budget for buybacks of former right to buy homes, and this is partly linked to people who have that kind of risk where they're wanting to sell their home. They find that they can't get an EWS1 form. So we're kind of setting out the kind of parameters of what we would pay to bring a home back into use for homeless families or just as general needs council housing. So that's just one thing worth adding. In terms of the hierarchy of needs, if you like, in terms of what projects we would be looking to do remedial works first, it goes without saying that if there's an immediate risk to life or an FRA that shows the highest risk ratings, that's where we act first. I think it's well known that we put in place a Waking Watch kind of precautionary measure at So Gardens on Mary Curie a few weeks ago for that very purpose, while we were installing better quality fire alarm systems. But in terms of the wider hierarchy, I'll punt that one in the direction of Dave or Simon.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick it up. I mean, you've answered it, in fairness, Leo. So the answer is, in fact, once the FRA is undertaken, assessments undertaken, that will drive behaviour around that anyway. As Leo has alluded to, we are doing some desktop surveys which may lead to more intrusive surveys on all of our high-rise blocks regardless. We have a very clear understanding at the moment of our high-rise. At the moment, we have none with ACM cladding. We had others that will have other cladding, which again picks up the point that Leo made earlier, that at the moment the focus is on ACM and not on other cladding elements, whereas actually Southwark's gone above and beyond that, because we're actually focusing on all. So at the moment, you know, we have a shall I say, we have an itinerary of what's on those blocks at the moment. So we understand what's there, squandrel panels, for example, etc. So we understand the risk that we've got, and we've got no risks at this moment in time that identify to us that we have an immediate problem. So in terms of the response to the who goes first, the survey will be undertaken, and the new asset management refresh is picking up all of those factors.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So on my list at the moment, I have Ina, then Chris, then Dora. I'll come to you first, Ina.
I want to thank you first to Leo and to David, because between two of you, you already answered my question, which was about immediate risk and how much of the percentage of the stock it has to be addressed immediately. So thank you so much for answering a question I never asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'm going to come to you, Chris.
Yeah, you probably won't be surprised that I'm actually would like to make a statement that I received from the Ledbury Action Group that was sent to me by Danielle Gregory. I mean, I'm sure she'd be able to give a much more concise presentation than me, but if you're happy for me to do it, I will read out her observations. Her main observation is that the fire risk now are worse than they were in 2019, and it's based on there are 174 council-owned high-rise residential blocks in Southwark. The fire risk assessments for those blocks are shown. So after 18 months later, since the original fire risk assessments were made, the action group revisited the fire risk assessments. And of the 126 blocks, it was found that 76 blocks, more than 60%, show there's no change or improvement in their overall rating compared to their recent fire risk assessment. Only 19 of these were of tolerable rating in the first place. The remaining 57 were considered to be of low, high, moderate or substantial risk. 34 blocks, which is over 26%, showed a worse rating compared to the previous rating in 2019. 16 blocks, which is over 12%, showed an improved rating compared to their previous fire risk assessment. So in conclusion, 35 blocks have either remained at a tolerable risk level or seen on improvements to their rating compared to their last fire risk assessment. 91 blocks were considered to be at moderate or substantial risk or had received a worse overall rating than their previous. Now, this is obviously, we're getting one picture that there's nothing for us to be alarmed about, and you know, nobody's at any great risk, but these figures obviously show that progress has been really slow, and that as far as the tenants in those blocks are concerned, their lives are at risk because there doesn't seem to be any immediate improvement being made. I just wondered what the comment would be on that.
Leo,
and this is done with clear research, and I have to say that Danielle Gregory does work for the Tau Block campaign, so she's not doing this from an emotional point of view. She's doing it from a very specific. She's coming from a very specific direction.
Thank you, Chris. Leo, yes, it would be good to get your response to that.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you to Danielle for pinging that over. I wish you'd pinged it over maybe a couple of days earlier, because we might have had a bit more time to try and analyse some of the information that you sent. So I think it's a good exercise actually to compare obviously before and after of FRAs, and obviously it does show a kind of picture of lots of blocks fire rating improving and some that have gone down. I think the sort of two factors that are worth sort of bearing in mind is that when a fire risk assessor goes and has a look at a block, they're not just looking at the building fabric, they're looking at things that are influenced by kind of behavioural lifestyle factors. So it might be kind of rubbish on balconies, block bin chutes. They might also just on that day be capturing a block that an element that might be midway through a live repair case as well. But we haven't had time to kind of analyse those blocks, because it came through I think about 2 or 3 hours ago, to analyse those blocks that have fallen. But it is interesting observations, and one that we certainly will have a look at. I think it's also worth adding as well that the updated FRAs were kind of throughout 2020, during a period where our ability to undertake major works, do remedial works, particularly works that are internal, that are not related to kind of immediate risk of life, has been limited because of the pandemic, and the major works kind of programme has been sort of frustrated by that. So I think that may be potentially, I'm kind of speculating here, but it may be a factor for some of the findings in that blog post as well. But it is interesting. I would kind of ask Glenn and Danielle to send it over a bit earlier if they're able to next time round, but we'll certainly be having a look at it in more detail, and happy to respond to you. I don't know, Dave, Simon, if there's anything more worth adding on that. I know we had a brief chat about it just before this meeting.
I mean, only to add, I mean, obviously I've not seen the report and added detail, but, you know, in terms of just to give assurances about, you know, whether things have moved or not moved, a risk assessment will go backwards and it will go forwards, you know, over the life of that building. And to move something, and I think it's understanding the details, so doing a report in isolation isn't always helpful, in the sense that to move a building from, say, you know, a tolerable level to a low moderate, which is the next level up, could be on the date of inspection, as Leo has pointed out, that the bin chutes were blocked, or there was bicycles being left in the common parts, which prevents egress, proper egress. So that, you know, increases the risk rating for that building. What then happens from that risk assessment is it comes back and it's loaded up, and all the task actions that come from that. So an example being that task action would be sent to resident services for them to then contact the resident or to get the bin chutes cleared, etc. So it's a snapshot. The best way to describe it, for those that may or may not have ever had a car, it is like a car MOT, effectively, that is a snapshot at that particular date in time. But rest assured, we visit our properties daily, you know, through many different, you know, touch points, and we're always monitoring. And hence, when we have alluded to, I think, you know, if you look at the moment, we've probably got, I think it's 2 from memory, buildings that are on a substantial rating. Both of those buildings, one of them, Leo's mentioned earlier, is Marie Curie, which currently has a waiting watch, and the other one is also in programme and on, you know, with work about to start. So it's just to give assurances that some of those risk ratings aren't risk to life. They're just about what's happening to that building at that particular time, and that ongoing monitoring happens every day.
So thank you for those responses. There's 2 points that come out of that exchange. What I mean, first of all, accept the point you make, Leo, that about timing. You know, it's good that we've got this information from Danielle, and thank you, Danielle, for sending it through. Clearly, you know, we can't expect you to respond in detail this evening. You know, myself, I've been able to have a quick look at it, but I've been in meetings right up to this meeting, so I've not had a chance to look at it more closely. Yeah, but good that we've got a commitment this evening just to go away and take a look at that data, investigate it a little bit more. You know, if we could get just a commitment to write back to myself as chair for me to share with the rest of the committee a response to that. I think that would be helpful. On the kind of snapshot issue, I think that, you know, yes, that's a fair point, but then again, also these risk assessments are important formal assessments, and you know, a snapshot in a way is the best that we've got in terms of coming to a kind of formal assessment of where a building is at in terms of its safety. So it's you know, it's an established practice, and it's something we do also need to take seriously as well. But I do take into account, Dave, the points you made about, you know, trying to reassure people that ongoing assessments are taking place as well. That is important to remember. So what we'll take as an action, hopefully an agreed action between all of us this evening, is, Leo, if it's okay, I saw nods when I was speaking earlier, just to kind of get a kind of bit of a written response. Doesn't need to be exhaustive, but a written response to the methodology and the findings of Danielle's figures would be really helpful. I'm going to come to Dora next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As somebody who was involved, well, who was around when Lakanal unfortunately went up in flames and caught up in the trauma for a lot of other people who were around at the time, I see that in response to that, you set up a board. The report's called a Building Safety Board, chaired by the Director of Housing and vice chaired by Director of Asset Management and the Commander of London Fire Brigade, etc. My question is quite simple. How does the setting up of this board help me to help my constituents, to reassure them that that, you know, Southwark has got this under control, basically? How does that help me? Many of my constituents are coming to see me because they feel their landlords are not treating this issue with the urgency that it deserves. So how does this creation of these new posts and this new board help me to help them?
Gavin, I'm going to let Dave answer that because he's set the thing up. So
no problem. Dave,
I can give a version of answer, but yeah, go on, Dave.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, the whole purpose of it and the fact that, you know, the London Fire Brigade are going to be involved in it means we've got a very much a coordinated approach to it. We've also on the Southwark Council website, we've put some data up there which will help residents, not just Southwark housing residents, but Southwark residents in general as well, because it's important that we capture those people that are frustrated by this. There's an email address on there as well where they can write to us, and we will endeavour to do some response to them, or we'll be trying to support them. Ironically, one today, you know, we had one for, you know, a housing association. I won't name them, but a housing association today, you know, and it was an immediate email to their chief executive to say, are you aware that it's on your radar? You know, so it can be simple things like that. Other more complicated cases where it's unfortunately a, you know, private residency, you know, owned by a company in Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that. That's where Des has got this massive challenge, and we're serving enforcement notices. And, you know, we've actually in the process of doing that at the moment. We've visited the properties with the JIT team. The JIT team is the specialist team that work through the MHCLG, that help us with inspections around the buildings to understand what the problems are. We've served Section 235 notices on around 100 buildings at the moment. Those Section 235 notices are requesting the information, i.e. what material have you got on the outside of your building? How can you assure us you're safe, etc. So lots of really proactive stuff been going on incredibly over the last only 8-9 weeks, really, as we put this together, and it came under my remit. And so in terms of sort of trying to support the residents, look on our website. There's an email address. We can do what we can do. We have powers, but we also have limited powers. But we'll explain that, and we'll try to give them, you know, points in the right direction of where they can and cannot get additional help. And even to the extent that, you know, MHCLG have been quite helpful in supporting people with their grant submissions and things like that to get some of the money. And now there's a bit more money coming through that will again prove even more helpful.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you mentioned the problems with some housing associations, because I have quite a few in my ward, and there are issues. I don't think even they would deny it. So therefore, this web site that you've set up, is it well used? Is it well known? Can you send me a link to it? And I'm glad to hear you say that you actually fired off a few emails to the chief executive, because most of them ignore my emails completely and drag their feet. So can we look to you? Can I look to you to support me and my constituents when we need to send off emails to the chief executives of the various housing associations in my ward? Can I look to you for support then?
I'm already doing it, and of course you can. I mean, the reality is we're building up the team. You know, I'm having to do a restructure within my own department to accommodate this as well. Unfortunately, we get no financial support. It's an expectation. The building safety bill, when it eventually comes to the fore, will give more powers. So, you know, that will give, you know, it turns it into legislation, so it will give us more powers. What Des particularly has been working really hard with is working with our LFB, colleagues, and we're understanding how each other's powers can help each other as well. And, you know, I can't praise them enough for the work, especially Borough Commander Phil Morton, who has been exceptional in lending support, not only to the Building Safety Board, but equally to the day-to-day operational sort of strategic stuff as well. So it's good that we're working in conjunction with each other, and absolutely, you know, that it's on there on the website for everyone to see. We'll do what we can, and we'll try and support them, because, you know, we all understand it. I think this touches most families, you know, so for us it's vitally important that we support.
Yeah, it's very traumatizing. So okay, so that's very helpful. Leo's put in the chat the link, and I should definitely publicise it within my constituency. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dora. So just got a quick question, Leo. In your introductory comments, you were talking about the EWS1 forms and a lot of the reporting around this issue, and how the interaction with leaseholders. Are clearly lots of people very worried about this issue. You know, the figures we were hearing about 1 in 6 leaseholders considering bankruptcy. Obviously, there'll be lots of people in Southwark who are very worried about that, and very worried to find themselves in that situation. You said to date that the council has not been recharging to leaseholders. Does that suggest that that may happen in the future, or that there is a change of policy currently under consideration?
I might kind of. I think it's possibly too early to say, just because the overall costs of the both the inspections and subsequent remedial works are unknown. So I think we'll be in a better position to make a call on that once Part B have done their initial round of inspections for high-rise blocks, and also the blocks that have external wall systems, of which there's about 79, including the high-rise as well. So.
Okay. All right. So it's going to wait and see following the inspections. And I wanted to ask you also about the buybacks on right to buy as well, which is interesting from the point of view of the issue we're currently talking about here, but is interesting for a whole range of other reasons as well. So a very generalized question. Could you tell us more about that, please?
No. I'll try. I mean, there's it's been a sort of a part of the New Homes programme that we've been trying to develop for a while. We've put in a bid for some grant support for it as well, both in terms of move on funding, in terms of homelessness from the GLA, as well as for kind of general needs council housing. I can't say whether that'll be successful or not, because it isn't a new build, obviously. But at the minute, we're hoping to secure an initial funding for at least 40 of those buybacks, and we'll kind of track what the take up based on the offer that we're making is over the coming months. But that's a decision that hasn't quite been finalised yet, but I think it's safe to talk about it because it is part of our thinking.
Okay, thank you. Chris, just checking, is that a new hand that you've raised there? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it's just a quick note of really just on the question of the fire risk assessments. The problem is that the snapshots are the only evidence that we have. So the snapshots are given without any explanation, and we are left with that till the next round of assessments are made. So how can we get the information about the work that's actually being done to improve the situation, rectify the situation? Because we're just seeing the ballpark figures until the next time. And just the other point that Dora was making about how to get that information out to tenants, it seems the answer is always go to the website. Now, okay, so you'll send that information out to the respective councillors so that they can spread that information. What sort of communication is being made with the networks actually on the estate, the tenants associations that need that information and talk to the residents every day? I think we're all getting very tired of just being told go to the website, because many people can't actually do that.
Leo, do you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, so it's not just a snapshot like what you see in Danielle's blog. You can see the full FRAs. I've just put the link in the website.
It's described as a snapshot, yeah.
It's more than a snapshot, it's the full FRA that you can see block by block. So have a look at that.
Now, I'm
in
sorry,
terms of
what John said was that what we saw was a snapshot of what happens on any one particular day when the block is being assessed.
Okay, I mean you know.
He actually said that.
Yeah, I mean it will be a fire risk assessor who's looking at all the different components and elements of that block on a particular day. I mean, when you do a kind of more intrusive FRA, it might take a little bit longer, but it's a piece of work that sort of starts and ends over a period of time. So that's kind of what's being described as a snapshot. Obviously, you wouldn't have FRAs sort of every day or every week, but yeah, I'm not entirely clear what. Go on, Dave. You've got your hand up.
Dave, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to come in there. When I say it's a snapshot, it's like anything. You do the inspection on the Monday, and on the Tuesday something can change. We could go there on a Monday and say it's a wonderful, tolerable situation. The next day when we're not there, if somebody leaves bags of rubbish or the bean chute gets blocked, that risk, if it had been evaluated that day, would have been higher. I think what's important, and the point that I was getting across is that there are FRA task actions that come out of every inspection. So when we see something, work is issued to remediate that. If something becomes intolerable, so we're not happy with it, we will do more intrusive work, and we will do more intrusive work on that. So it's not left alone. So once the FRA is done, what we're saying is structurally that building's sound. From a structural point of view, we've got no concerns around the fire element and the fire safety of that building. Most of the stuff that changes that risk rating, as I said before, is about the lifestyle of how the building's being used by the occupants, by the residents. That then evolves. If we see something like we saw, for example, at Marie Curie, we saw something at Marie Curie we weren't happy with, so we did more intrusive work. And that led us to where we are now. And that's the same for every building. So when I say it's a snapshot, it has to be, because we just don't have the resources to do FRA inspections on a more frequent basis. We've got 2,600 blocks. So it's an enormous undertaking. But what we are doing is doing those inspections on a regular basis, and then we've got task actions that follow up. So it's not left, the work is done.
Thank you. Desmond, Vincent, you were indicating, I think, just to come back on that point.
Yeah, well, just to sort of expand on what Dave was saying there, and I appreciate the point that you're making. It doesn't say your name on this, so apologies. But when we're saying that what those actions that come out of that, if there's physical changes that need to be done to the building because it highlights a higher risk, then those actions are taken out from that. If they're management issues in terms of residents leaving rubbish, then that's communicated to the estate services to ensure that they're monitoring those elements, or whether it be housing management because there's a particular risk around a resident and ASB behaviour that's rendering those buildings more at risk. So there's that sort of physical element that we look at, and we make those physical changes to the building to render it safe. But there's those daily things that happen, and part of that communication between the different services within the council are measured and communicated with, as I said, the estate services to make sure that they're clearing those things up. So people have a heightened understanding around fire safety and some of the management issues that we need to ensure are undertaken to make those buildings safe. But it's a good point that you raised, but that's the sort of things that we do to manage that, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yes. And I can see, Mr. Holmes, you're indicating. I'm going to come to you in a second. Before I do, Hamish, I could be wrong about this, but I think from memory, this item originally came to us at your suggestion. I think it was you that kind of suggested it was part of the work programme. So I just wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions if you have any.
Well, thank you, Chair, and sorry as well that I was a little late getting on today. So it may be that some of this has been discussed, but I note in the report that we've been given for today's meeting that it sets out a number of options around the possible support, the possible additional support that the council could offer to residents who find themselves in this position. And I just wonder, really, obviously there's a kind of gradient of support from in terms of how proactive the council might be able to be, and I suppose it would just be useful to hear any further comments around the merits and disadvantages of each of those, and the thinking at the moment amongst the cabinet and officers.
Leo, do you want to come back on that point?
I'm just trying to understand the question a little bit. Sorry, Hamish. You're asking about what further proactive measures, in addition to what we've described in the report, you think we should be looking at?
Yeah, so in the report, there are sort of different options given around, they're called options for consideration. It's paragraphs 30 through to 35 of the report, which details option 1, issue a simple statement that it's not the council's responsibility to undertake EWS1 assessments. Option 2, procure a third party to undertake the assessment process. Option 2A being to recharge the leaseholder. Option 3 to then be creating a new internal structure within the council to undertake that process. And obviously, I'm sure that residents who find themselves in this position would be really keen for the council to either undertake option 3, directly overseeing this work, or option 2, ensuring the work is done and bearing the costs. But I recognise that would obviously have resource implications. So it would just be interesting to hear. Obviously, you've set out quite transparently, which is to be welcomed, the different options and the thoughts that obviously are happening within the council. But it'd be useful to hear if there's any further thought that's been given to which of those might be viable, and the sort of pros and cons of the different approaches.
So I answered that at the beginning of the meeting. I'm conscious, mindful you arrived a bit later. I'm conscious Dave's got his hand up, so I'll give him a go to answer this question because I've already had a go.
Yeah, the answer is, Hamish, that when we originally did this, we wanted to go for option 3, quite frankly, but then we found the complexities and the limited resources, i.e., it depends on who you listen to, but there's talk about there's only 200 qualified people in the country. Now that's sort of part the truth, but not all the truth. There's 2 parts to an EWS1 form. There's a part 1 and a part 2. Simon, Desmond, and I could probably sign item 1. We could not do item 2, which is where the problem lies. That's the fire safety element. Unfortunately, there's been some sort of misinformation really about qualifications and what it would do. People talk about getting people qualified within 3-4 months. It's impossible. If somebody was to give me training in 3 or 4 months, I still wouldn't sign the form. because I wouldn't believe that I'd be competent enough. You know, being a fire safety engineer takes years, not months. That leads to its own problem in the sense that then you've got limited resources that you can, you know, use to undertake the EWS1 form. We then took the decision to go external. So that's what we've done. We've engaged a company who are working very closely with us. They are now our go-to fire safety engineers. They are the second ones. We had somebody in before that let us down. And the reason they let us down is because if you can imagine, if you're one of those 200 people, you can command enormous fees to undertake that. And of course, we as the housing sector, can't compete with the private sector, who are just, you know, taking up all of the options and buying these people out. It's a bit like the COVID vaccines. Whoever gets there first and offers the most money gets the best deal. And equally, you know, the time it takes to train somebody, it would be very hard for us to retain their services, because once they're qualified, you know, in terms of pay and reward, we wouldn't be able to get close to what they could get offered in the private sector. So we are looking at ways that we can start to sort of, and this is something Des has been quite prescriptive in targeting, is when they're looking at a building and saying, does this building just need part one completed, or does it need part one and part two, or is it just not required at all? So we're trying to have those, you know, discussions and arguments, if you like, because we've found in many occasions the lenders, the building societies, just won't entertain it. They're going for a blanket. We want the whole form filled out, and we're saying, well, actually that's contradictory to what the requirements are. But so we're trying that approach, and that's the sort of support we're trying to offer our leaseholders in Southwark Borough, not just the council. And we're trying to say to them, well, actually, we believe you only need part one completed, which means you don't need a fire engineer. You could go to any chartered building surveying company and they can do that for you. And we're happy to support that, and even write to your lenders and say that is actually our perception and our understanding, and we can refer them to the written sort of clarity, if you like, that's come out of on the .gov websites. And then obviously if they need a part two, you know, then they've got to go and source it. But we can't, you know, we're restricted in what we can help them on that, because those survey costs are exceptionally high at the moment. And if it's only affecting one leaseholder, you're not going to expect them to pick up a £20,000 bill, for example, to get the EWS1 form completed, that then every other resident could benefit from without contributing. So it is quite a complex process, and trying to unpick it. And, you know, sometimes it's unhelpful what gets publicised. But we are in discussions with RICS. We've written to RICS. In fact, Kieran Williams wrote to them while he was our CMH, actually, with our support, and we also wrote to the MHCLG on it. So, you know, but that's what we're working through. Sorry, I might be going on a bit too much detail.
No, it's helpful detail. Thank you. As I can see no other indications from members of the committee, Mr. Holmes, you indicated that you wanted to ask a question. Please do go ahead. I think you're on mute though.
Hi. Yeah, firstly, the information from Dave Hodgson was like really helpful, and yeah, that was great. The question is, like, from a tenant's perspective, like if you're following these fire risk assessments in your own block, it's about the process of getting information on the work that's been identified. I understand it's a kind of a snapshot, but over the period of like the following year, how would you kind of keep track on those? For instance, mine is let me just have a look. Mine is in one of the higher kind of risk groups. I am a substantial risk. And the three kind of main issues, two are really kind of invasive. One is about kind of fire compartmentation between like soil and water stacks going upwards and downwards. And the other one seemed to be an investigation into the kind of panels below the windows. But the third one was kind of like an easy win, really. And I wondered if, what would the tenant's first point of call be to kind of get some information on progress? Because my local housing officer doesn't seem to be that person, and there's no direct email or
So
information.
Kind of general question about what the from a tenant's point of view,
what's the pathway from
pathway
a tenant's perspective to get involved with, to try and get more information on this, because there's nothing direct on the website.
Okay. Dave, are you perhaps the best placed person to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there. I mean, it's a good question, and it's something that we have been working on over the past sort of 18 months about, how we better improve that communication process. I mean, at the moment, if you live in a building that is over 18 metres, those FRAs are published on the website and they're easily accessible, if you've obviously got access to the internet. The other FRAs are available on request. So we've got a generic email address that you can email into, and I'll get Simon to sort of like publish that after, that you can email and say, look, I've looked at my FRA. Can you give me a bit more of discussion about the progress? Linked to that also, Glenn, is on the website at the moment, there's a full program of when we're doing the QHIT work. So when we're coming to do major works on your particular home or your area, and that's going to be updated as we do the asset management refresh, and that sort of links into it as well. But what I would say is, we're more than welcome to share that information with tenants. If you want to ask a question, there's an email address there to say, look, I've had a look at it, I'm a bit concerned, because the last thing we want is you not to be reassured in your building, because it sounds, sometimes I question these ratings, because when somebody says it's a substantial risk, it seems contradictory, doesn't it, when somebody's saying, no, you're okay, don't worry about it. And I get that, so I think the important thing is that, we get the communication going, so we can share that email address. We're happy to, have a conversation, explain to you why that's not happening or why we don't think that that's a problem, and answer your questions. That is just, totally, within your gift.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Damien, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of minor things. I couldn't help myself, but on paragraph 38, you've invented a new department called the MCLGH. I know it's alphabet soup, that department, but you might want to have a correction on that. I don't know why I spot things like that. I had one very quick question, because I'm a bit confused. Can anyone tell me why the EWS1 form is only valid for 5 years? Because we've got, the block I live in was built in 1956. It looks exactly the same as it was built in 1956. Does anyone know why they put a time limit on that? Is there a reason for it? If nothing's going to change on the building?
Leo, you nodding as if you know about that issue?
Well,
Dave's put his hand up.
Dave will give a better answer than me. Okay. Chris earlier was talking about the risk of having a snapshot, because the fire risk can change from one day to the next. So over a 5-year period, you're not only going to have management issues, kind of lifestyle behavioural issues around how the block is used that change, but the condition of a block is not fixed in time. Some components might deteriorate, so that's kind of why there's need to renew that certification, that assessment in a given time period. There are some people who say that you should do it more often than 5 years. Go on, Dave. I know you.
No, it's a good answer, Leo.
There we go.
Yeah, it's a good answer. The reality is...
I thought you were going to say they were money-grabbing bastards, but obviously that wasn't the politically correct answer.
That's a good job Leo went first,
Chair,
quite frankly.
Just a reminder that this is a public meeting, everyone. And
absolutely. I think, different people will give different views. If you went and ask a solicitor how much it's going to cost, from some advice, you'll get different ideas and different sums. And I think this is the same, picking up on Leo's point. I don't know the science. It was agreed, it was Ricks that came up with the idea of every 5 years. I believe that cycle would have been risk-based. It would have been based on, average life cycle processes on the buildings themselves. But there is no science to it, Councillor, to be honest.
No, that's what I thought. It sounds like a length of string. Chair, just while I'm here then, can I make a couple of suggestions? Just ahead. In terms of how can be perhaps a bit more effective as a scrutiny committee with what we've heard this evening, there are two things that jumped out to me. One is, would it be possible that cabinet member that Leo might be able to update us? It would be a big update, just to see how is going on that. And obviously, if there's anything we can do as a committee to sort of along and help our residents themselves into a position, because I know there's a lot of people are really stressed out at the moment with builds and major works and whatever. And if they've decided that the best thing for them is to sell back to the council, that's good for the council, and it takes a lot of stress out of their lives.
Damien, I'm really sorry. It's possible
on that.
Damien, just a second. It might just be me, but I'm getting a lot of interference on the sound, and I'm picking up very little of what you're saying. I'm seeing other people nodding. Just to try and overcome this, could you try turning off your camera and then starting again on that last contribution?
Okay, can you hear me a bit better this time?
Yes, that's much better.
Otherwise, I can put it into chat. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know. So it was just a couple of suggestions. Okay, just a couple of suggestions. It would be really nice if we could hear an update back on the buyback on the right to buy tenants, just as we go forward. It doesn't have to be a big report or anything, but just seeing if progress is being made because of the stress I know a lot of tenants are under with, well, leaseholders actually under with Section 20s and all the rest of it coming their way. It's really causing a lot of stress in their lives, and I think the buyback is a really good idea. And the second thing was the BSB. So I'm meeting with Michael Scorer and offered my services to join the BSB, which I thought that a member involvement might contribute to the value of that board. But that might not be appropriate. It might be more appropriate if the BSB perhaps were to report back to this committee instead, so we can all hear progress is being made in terms of what the WS1 forms. Basically, we can do our job as a scrutiny committee, and the BSB sounds like a pretty important, high-powered sort of operation.
Okay.
I think it would be good if this committee kept tabs on that. With just two suggestions anyway.
Okay, no, they're helpful suggestions. I just kind of cut out a little bit at the end, but I think I got most of what you were saying. So as you know, we've got a pretty tight work program now. We've got the one meeting remaining. We'll be bringing some recommendations on a couple of different areas back to that meeting at the end of March as well. So it's not that your suggestions aren't sensible. They sound sensible to me. It's just that they both sound like issues that would be a matter for a newly convened Housing Scrutiny Commission in a coming year, and probably it would be best if we left the decision on the work programme and the inclusion of those issues on that work programme to that committee, however it is made up. It may be people on this meeting. It may be that there are some different people as well. So my suggestion would be that is fed into the work programme work that is done at the start of the next municipal year, if that's okay.
It's fair. Yeah, no, it's fair enough, yeah. Chair. I mean, it could just be a written report back. I wasn't wanting to take up the committee's time, but no, that's fine. It was just a thought.
Cool. That's very helpful. Right, so I mean, the one other action that I'd take from the discussion that we've had would be, Leo, it would be helpful to kind of get a written response to the kind of figures that you obviously haven't had time to have a look at ahead of tonight's meeting. That would be interesting and useful. And so I'm going to finish there, but I can see that Hamish is indicating. So Hamish, I'm going to come to you.
Just picking up on the second of Damien's suggestions around the BSB reporting back, can I just, as a matter of interest, can I just ask, are the minutes of their meetings or any kind of routine updates, are they published in the ordinary course of events? Does something go onto the council's website after, periodically or following each of their meetings, or is it currently a sort of private board? And if the latter, I would really support Damien's suggestion that they be asked as a recommendation for this group to report back in some formal way. And I would have thought actually just doing a written report periodically to whoever happens to sit on the Housing Scrutiny Commission at that time, whatever the makeup is, would actually be quite a useful recommendation. Needn't take up the committee's time without further, need or specific requirement to, but it would just give a form of accountability and transparency to that process.
Yeah, that's helpful. So there was a kind of initial point there before you get to the recommendation, which was about the kind of openness of the minutes and how transparent that was. I don't know if you know the answer to that one, Leo.
Happy to take that away. I think, I know that as a cabinet member, I'll be getting kind of updates on, obviously I get all the information on council stock, but the private sector stock will be getting kind of lists off periodically in terms of which blocks have had inquiries, which are being monitored, which have had enforcement notices, update on remedial works, etc. But happy to take that away and discuss that with officers in terms of how we can make the work of that board feel a bit more transparent. I think that's a reasonable ask. And just on sort of Damien's other question around reporting back on the right to buy buybacks, and that's just an IDM report that I'd be signing off sort of soonish. So I'm happy to share that with the chair of this commission as and when that comes along, which should be, probably before your next work programme is agreed.
Chair, can I just also support
go ahead,
what Hamish has said? I think it will also be good governance as well, because it will make the whole thing like a sort of, a whole holistic. And I think that'll be really good and good reassurance for our constituents as well. We've got on this committee, we've got tenants reps, etc. This will be the best place for these recommendations to come through to. So I'd support that. Thank you.
Okay. Everton, if we could just make sure that's, I'm not seeing anybody dissent from that on the committee. So if we could make sure that's recorded in the minutes as a recommendation that we're making, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so I'm going to draw that agenda item to a close. I'd like to thank all of the officers and to Leo for coming along and answering our questions in such a detailed fashion this evening. It's been very useful and helpful discussion. And obviously feel free to make your way from the meeting virtually, and we'll finish up here. So the other agenda item was around our work programme, which is for noting, and there are several outstanding pieces of work in terms of recommendations that we'd like to make. That work is ongoing and will come to the next meeting. We've got a bit of a gap now, and what I propose to do is to kind of bring those to the next meeting, and for us to be able to have a discussion about that and hopefully agree them at the next meeting. Obviously that we would hope to make that part of the papers, so people would have advanced sight of that work, and people can then give their reflections at the meeting. We can come to an agreement. So I think it's the 29th of March from memory, Everson, but as our next meeting. So I've got nothing more to say on the work programme than that. So I will move along if there's no other indications from the committee, which kind of brings us to the end of the meeting. And I'd like to finish by saying I'm very relieved that nobody has demanded that I read the standing orders and understand them. I'm very relieved that nobody has said that I have no authority here, and that nobody's
We're just happy you didn't. We're happy that you didn't turn into a cat. You'll see it tonight when you get home. I think
that is also. Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it. That's also an ongoing risk. So thank you everybody for your contributions this evening, and I will see you again soon. If I don't see you at the next meeting, if I don't see you before the next meeting, I will see you then.